Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of Power of Women. I am Sharice Walker. I am with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, and we are so thrilled to have you all joining us this morning for an incredible conversation. I know I am looking forward to gleaning some great knowledge based on the topic today. So again, welcome to everyone. We are excited to have you join us. We are excited about the panel discussion that we are going to get into. There's just a little bit of housekeeping that I want to make sure that we do. First and foremost, the reason that we put this particular conversation together was that we did some homework to kind of understand equity and inclusion. And a piece of that really does have to do with the ability to negotiate and to navigate spaces in the negotiation area. So we wanted to really bring a thoughtful conversation to you all that we, again, hope will be meaningful and manageable. So we want to kind of start out, though, by kind of gauging some information directly from you. Audrey's going to help me with a poll question. We want to kind of get a understanding of who is joining us on the call today. So if you could fill out the poll questions and let us know, are you entry level, manager, director? Are you C-suite? Are you a business owner? Or is there another space within your organization or company that you sit in? And it looks like we've got a good number so far of managers on the call. Looks like we've got a good mix of everyone, but it looks like manager and then director level is kind of what our audience looks like. And that helps us as an organization. That also helps our panel as they are thoughtful about the conversation that we're going to have. So thank you for that question, Audrey. The next question that we're going to pop up on the screen really has to do with how we can make this platform impactful for you. So let us know what type of programming that you want to see in 2022. We try to cover a various range of topics: work-life balance, negotiation, of course, imposter syndrome. But once Audrey gets that next poll question up, it will be related to it will definitely be related to what you want to see in the future. So please let us know that. And if there isn't, oh, Audrey already captured that, sorry. If there was a category that we didn't cover, go ahead and put that in the chat so that we can capture that information as well. We want to make sure that we are mindful of what our audience is wanting to see and be exposed to in terms of topics and content. So I'm going to get us right into our first speaker for today. We at the Alliance want to always be mindful of our connection to the work that we do, and we do that through our connected purpose. It really is an example of how we connect to the mission and the vision of the overall organization, specifically the Power of Women platform. Joining me today is a friend, colleague, and partner that's been very supportive of the Power of Women platform, and that's Johnelle Causwell. Johnelle is Citizen Diplomacy Program Director at International House, and we are so thrilled to have Johnelle here with us this morning. Johnelle's going to take a few minutes to talk about how her organization, International House, has really been supportive of the women in Afghanistan and all that International House has done to ensure that we are finding ways to help them. So Johnelle, thank you for joining us, and we really look forward to what you're going to share for our Connected Purpose this morning.
Thank you so much, Sharice. And again, I apologize. I just have a little bit of a hoarse throat, but I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you so much. I so appreciate the opportunity to join you and everyone today. The Power of Women is a very, very important program, and we really, really enjoy being engaged with the program and supporting it. International House, or Citizen Diplomacy Department, which I oversee, we work with the U.S. Department of State to bring rising leaders from all around the world to Charlotte and the surrounding region to learn best practices and to share knowledge and to empower each other with our best ideas on a variety of topics. And we've had the extreme pleasure of hosting delegations of women business owners, government leaders, and just leaders in all kinds of fields from Afghanistan throughout the years. These delegations have come to Charlotte. Some of them have met with, local city leaders, have met with business leaders, and all of this is an aid of supporting women around the world, supporting women in countries where they face a greater adversity than the women here in the United States. They have far more obstacles, and they are dealing with a cultural and social bias that is not present in our culture. Maybe it is, our system is not perfect. We are certainly still in the battle for equality here, equal pay, equal opportunities, equal leadership, but other countries have it far worse. And so when we host these delegations of these rising female leaders from Afghanistan, it was really amazing for us to share the resources that we have here in our community and to give them an idea of best practices and to show what a sisterhood of women leaders looks like and how that feels for us to come together and empower each other. With the Taliban takeover, our department has been working to reach out to our alumni, for all the women leaders that have come and participated in our program here in Charlotte. And we've been reaching out to them to try and get them helpful information from the Department of State so that they will get some help to get out of the country, to leave the country. It was a very emotional time because a lot of them were very scared. They were scared for their lives. They were scared for their families because the incoming regime doesn't respect female leadership. Right now, as the situation is right now, we're welcoming refugees into our community, welcoming refugees from Afghanistan to Charlotte and the surrounding region. And International House will be offering support services in terms of legal support. We have our legal clinic that offers legal support to refugees, asylees, and immigrants. And we provide services such as language training and educational services so that we can properly integrate these newcomers to our community and give them the support that they need. And programs like the Power of Women, really important to highlight just how connected and supportive our community is. And so if anyone would like to find out more information, please feel free to contact me and reach out to me. And I'm very happy to be a part of the program. Thank you for having me.
Johnelle, thank you for that incredible insight. Did I hear you say that we are currently welcoming some of those women into our community right now?
That is correct. We are slowly getting more refugees who are being sent to the Charlotte area, and we will be starting to roll out our programs and services for legal and educational programs.
Awesome. Well, I encourage our audience members to really connect with Johnelle. If there are ways that you want to get involved, I'm sure she can help educate us on what companies in our community are doing to assist in this space. But if there is some more information, and Johnelle, you might have popped your information. She's popped her email into the chat. So if you want to get involved in this space or get some understanding on how you or your business could help, please give Johnelle a shout via email. Thank you again, Johnelle, for the information and for the work.
Thank you, Cherise. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we're going to go ahead and get right into the discussion. We wanted to have a conversation about negotiation and what is involved in the process, what skills and tactics you need to make sure that you have when you're faced with a negotiation situation. One of the things that I did learn from I think all of our panel members today and moderator is making sure that you're prepared. So we're hoping that this conversation will prepare you for what's next when you start to think about how you need to negotiate, whether it's for a new job, a position, buy-in, whatever it may be. We want to make sure that this conversation helps equip you with the tactics and tools to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our participants today that will be guiding that discussion. First up, I want to introduce Stacy Gray. Stacy is Senior Vice President and General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Belk. Stacy, welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Ericka Spradley. Ericka is, and I love this, Chief PowHer Officer and founder of Confident Career Woman. Ericka is an accomplished author, and both of these women have been very supportive of the Power of Women platform. Ericka, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. And our moderator today is Kellie Lofton. Kellie, like International House, has been a true supporter and partner through her work with the Junior League of Charlotte. Kellie is a board of director president. She has a really big job and is engaged in a lot of what's going on with women leadership, particularly Power of Women. So Kellie, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and get us started with moderating the conversation around negotiation.
Thank you so much, Charisse, and thank you to the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance Power of Women Network for just having me be a part of this very important conversation. I am personally excited about this conversation because, like many of you, I've had to navigate work and family and competing needs and have worked about, I've been wondering about the most effective way to advocate for myself. And I know that this will continue as my family's needs and my professional goals and needs continue to evolve. So I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to speak with all of you, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So first, let's talk about step one, preparing. So as Charisse mentioned, there's several stages to negotiation. So we know there's the preparation aspect, right? So there's the before. There's the during negotiation, and then there's the after. And like many things or most things in life, preparation is key. You know, the bulk of the work happens in the beginning. So we'll spend a good amount of our time today in this conversation talking about preparing. So the know before you go, if you will. So Stacy, I'd like to start with you because I want to hear from both of you about your best practices and personal experiences with preparing to negotiate. So Stacy, what would you say is a healthy way to think about negotiation? And how does preparedness help to build confidence?
Thank you. So I think preparation is really the most important thing you do, and how you frame entering a negotiation is one of the most important things as well. So what I do, I'm a lawyer, so I was trained to negotiate from when I went to law school on. Every day I negotiate as part of my job, but all of us negotiate because we all try to influence people. We all negotiate in our personal lives, in our professional lives. So the better that you can become at it, the easier it becomes. And so I like to do things in threes. So from a preparation, it's train, practice, rehearse, which all is, you know, they sound similar, but they are different. And so whenever you're going into a negotiation, one of the biggest things you can do, and especially for women, is to train our emotions, right? The more emotion that you have, there's been all this data that if you're really happy going into it, if you're really angry, if you're really sad, any of those extremes of emotions, that is going to be negative in a negotiation. So the more emotion, the less likely you are going to come to a resolution. So what can you do? And they also show it's the same thing with anxiety. the more anxiety that you have before you're coming into a negotiation, typically that leads to that fight or flight and all of those, again, strong feelings and emotions going into a negotiation. So part of the way to kind of calm yourself going in is this preparation piece. So what you want to do is first do your research, right? So you need to find out, number one, who has the leverage, right? There's always going to be a power player as part of the negotiation. So whether you're looking for a new job, whether you are negotiating your salary, whether it's part of your day job like me to negotiate, whether it's deals or contracts or part of litigation, no matter what it is, you've got to understand who has the leverage and what does the other side want. Sometimes it's really easy to understand. It could just be, someone has, for example, the only product in the market and you want the product. Or it's a job position that is highly coveted and there's, 100 people interviewing for the same job. Maybe it's you who have a special talent that makes you the one with the leverage position. Maybe you have the experience. There's lots of things that go into that. The internet is a really powerful tool. So, if you're applying for a new job, make sure you do all the research on the company before you even get there and try to negotiate anything. If it's a salary, make sure you understand what is the market. There's all of these pieces that go into it. And so if you're negotiating with another company, what do you know about the company? What do they want? What is the risk on the kind of spectrum of risk, and where will each side come into it? And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit with a win-win situation. So that's like number one for me, is as much research, and sometimes you don't have the time to do all of the research you want, but the more you can do, the better. And you also, so that's number one. Number two is really your presentation style, which you need, again, it's train, practice, rehearse. So it's this practice component. So a personal story that I'll share is, I thought I was, I went to law school and I thought that I was trained to be a negotiator. And then I got really nervous once I had to start doing that early in my career. And I remember my voice would be a little shaky when I first got on a call. I don't know if any of you know that or have had that happen, where your voice actually breaks a little bit from nerves. And one of the best things that I did is I actually had a career coach who helped me. And so the career coach, and let me tell you, it was painful because I had to practice. And I think this is even helpful no matter what stage in your career. Practice makes perfect, right? So, what I did, she had me leave her voicemails, and you can do this with a friend or someone else if you want to try it, and literally leave voicemails and see how your voice sounds when you're even leaving a message. Try videotaping yourself. It's really easy now with all of the technology. See how you come across when you're presenting. It's funny, we're less face-to-face now. It's, I think, a little bit easier to negotiate in person. As my grandfather once said, excuse my language, but someone can't be an ass if you're shaking their hand, and if you can even at some point get a drink with them, it's harder for them to be difficult when you're negotiating. So I think part of that is, practice. So literally, make sure that you're presenting correctly, that you're filling up the room when you negotiate, that you're not kind of hunched. Your body, your posture, your impressions, they count. The tone of your voice counts. All of that research that you did counts. And so really that rehearsal piece. So, Just if it's a big pitch, if it's you want to negotiate internally, if you want to influence someone, use practice and use, whether it's your coworkers, use your friends, use your family. My husband's heard me more often than I'd like to say, practicing things that I think are really important. I remember early in my career, he actually could recite my whole presentation. So I think those are some of the things. I know if Ericka needs to go to, but I think those are some of the things. Again, the more you can temper your emotion, build your confidence, train, practice, rehearse, the more confident and assertive in your negotiations you're going to be.
So, Stacy, thank you for that. You said several things that just really hit home for me. One thing you just said was, just the practice and the rehearsing that leads to confidence. And I've heard it said many times that it is competence that leads to confidence. And so it's the practice and the rehearsing that really gets you there so that you'll have the confidence when you're in the room. And I love that you talked about really being self-aware and practicing so that you have your emotional state and you know where you feel emotionally before you walk in the room so that you can control that better. That gives you power, right? And I think some of the other things that you really touched on that I know we'll go into was just the importance of, you talked about the handshake, right? So that building relationships aspect of preparing. That is something I know we're going to get into shortly, but I love several of the things that you just mentioned in terms of training, practicing, rehearsing to get to that confident place. And I know that has certainly been true for me, and just practicing, re-emphasizing, practicing, and also just talking with, it doesn't have to be a hired coach, but just your friends, your family. You can practice with yourself, with video, recording yourself on your own phone. I think that's very powerful advice and wisdom that you've shared with us.
And I do think that the simplification is key. So the more that you can break it down into easy chunks when you're negotiating and are very clear with what your message is, and you start out with the purpose, the framing is very important. So I think some of us can have the tendency to overcomplicate. So the clearer the message that we have, and when you practice that, when you're doing, all of these videos and everything else, I think you can see that even when you're watching yourself back or listening to yourself speak, whether you cut clearly or whether it's still a bit complicated to get your message across.
That's key also, is being clear about what it is that you want and communicating that clearly. The last thing I'll say that resonated with me a lot, and I want to hear Ericka's thoughts on this as well, as you talked about really being clear on what it is that you want and what it is the other side wants. So being clear about what is your perception of what is important for you, what is your perception of what is important for them, but then also there's the other piece, what is their perception of what's important to you, right? So what is it that they're thinking that is key for you as well, to make sure that is clear, as you mentioned, clear in the communication, what you need, so that it's easier to really talk about and negotiate and meet in the middle. Ericka, I would love to hear from you. Anything to add to Stacy's response?
Well, you both have made some excellent points. And I just want to mention also, right, from the perspective of awareness, is knowing how much your seat is worth in the marketplace. That is something that's ongoing, but definitely when you are preparing to negotiate. So there are so many salary websites that, we can look at to see how much the seat is worth. If you're internal, right, is there some information in terms of a range of pay for a particular role that you may be speaking about when you're talking about salary, but also making sure when you are negotiating that there is a level of alignment. And when I say alignment, I'm talking about, if I'm having a conversation with you about why you should pay me more, what are the performance metrics that we're measuring against? How is it that what I have done, I've contributed, my results align with what your expectations are of me. And then as a part of my preparation, I'm thinking about how I'm going to articulate my value, what I've accomplished, and why you should give me my yes.
And I think everything you just said really goes back into the preparedness, right?
Absolutely.
It takes time to do that research and to know your value and to know your worth before you walk in the room so that you can clearly articulate your value and your worth and your why.
Yes. Yes.
That's so important. So one of the things that that helps us to prepare and is alleviating and removing the fear of failure. Sometimes failure really can just get in the way before you even get into the room. And I would like to hear some of your personal techniques and strategies that you found useful in helping combat the fear of failure as you prepare and before you get into the room. So Ericka, I would love to start with you on that question.
Sure. Fear of failure is one of those things that we've all experienced at some point. And one of the things that has definitely worked for me and that has worked for my clients is really reframing failure and what that no means. Because when we have these negotiation conversations, a lot of times failure, is I didn't get what I wanted. But what happens when you are doing all of the right things in negotiation and you still get the no? It doesn't mean that you've necessarily failed. So if you get to that place where you are not getting, or you've convinced yourself that you may not get what you want, is there an opportunity to then take a step back and say, is this truly no? Is this not right now? And we as women have a tendency to talk ourselves out of our success. So really reframing this fear of failure and really looking at what is standing in the way of our success and those stories that we tell ourselves. Because more often than not, what I found in my coaching sessions is that the fear or the story that they're telling themselves around fear is not a true story. And once we can get to that point where we're having honest conversations about what's standing in the way of our success, then we can figure out a framework so that we can move forward.
That's powerful. What is standing in the way of success? Stacy, how would you respond to that question?
I think it's a good one because I do think a lot of successful women are perfectionists, and perfectionism can sometimes stand in the way of success. It can be a barrier. It can be, at the same time, it can be motivating, but then it can get to the point where it ends up being destructive. So taking that in the right way, there are so many women, men, who have experienced failures, turn them into opportunities, and figured out the next thing. If you look at typically any entrepreneur has a company that has failed, and then maybe there's a successful one later. If you look at some famous authors who didn't kind of become famous until in their 70s or later, I think you just for me, there's so many examples out there of people who have quote unquote failed to then break through to do something amazing. So I think the more that you can take feedback as a gift that you get, so when you get that challenging feedback, instead of being sensitive about it or automatically shutting it down, I think the more that you can see feedback as a gift, continue to try and improve yourself and realize that, maybe it's a failure in one sense, but it may, one door closes and another door opens. So I think women can be hard on themselves and kind of replay. And sometimes men are better at accepting that there was a challenge and then moving on. And so trying not to spin on some of that. I think the more that you can use it to be productive and forward looking, and not, you want to debrief on what happened, but then use it to springboard into something else. And the other simple thing, I think, is breathing. I know that sounds silly. There's lots about meditation and breathing, but and my 6-year-old daughter right now is literally learning it in school, rainbow breathing or roller coaster breathing, where you literally take your hand and you take deep breaths going in. And I sometimes feel like literally, if I feel myself, if my stress is really high, or if I'm fearful of something, that even just taking a minute and breathing, or taking a quick walk and getting out of headspace, or making sure you take your PTO, like little simple things can really help frame things in the right way.
That's really good. I love the idea of meditation and breathing and just staying calm. I do believe that women often struggle with the idea of being told no and the fear of failure. And, I can speak for myself personally. When I was younger in my career and I had young children, in advocating for my family and what is my next career move and what does that look like, I was a little more timid back then about, what to ask and how to advocate for my work arrangements and how I can work and how I can also meet the needs of my family. And I think, it does take practice and it takes time and getting comfortable, just being okay with hearing the no, or hearing a different option or a different opportunity even. And so, as you mentioned, being comfortable with feedback, I think, having the conversations and being open to not necessarily the result that you were wanting, but something different, allows opportunity to create relationships because you're having a conversation with someone. But then also just it's a different way of thinking and learning. And you may actually potentially have an experience that maybe in some ways is better than the one that you initially were planning for. So I think all of these are really great points. I do want to shift slightly and still in our preparation conversation, but I want to talk about how can sponsors and advocates help us prepare for successful negotiations. So we talked on the importance of relationships a little bit earlier. I want to kind of talk about how those relationships and having those advocates and sponsors can help prepare you for the negotiations that you're walking into. So Ericka, I'd like to start with you. What would you think is the importance of sponsors and advocates when preparing for negotiation? And can you talk about the importance of building relationships and social capital and how that can play a role?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for navigating the conversation to relationships, because far too often we are doing the work, we're performing in absence of the people and having those relationships. And so you, Kellie, have mentioned advocacy and being timid around it during our conversation, but women need mentors, sponsors, coaches at every level of their career. It's not only when they are negotiating. And so when you think of how this shows up during negotiation, we have to make sure that we are proactive around building those relationships as we work. And it is the quality of those relationships, not necessarily the quantity. So to be able to have influential individuals in rooms having conversations about us that we cannot access is one of the most powerful things that can happen for you in your career. Having someone mention your name when they're talking about projects, and when they're talking about roles, right? Just someone being able to amplify your voice in the form of advocacy, that is where you want to be in your career. Success is never a solo act.
Completely agree. I think those relationships and having someone really be able to speak on your behalf, even when you're not in the room, and support you is such a huge differentiator for me personally, even just some of the experiences that I've had professionally. Stacy, what would you say to that?
I agree with everything you both said. I think also, from a mentorship standpoint, I think it's important to really have an honest assessment about kind of your capabilities and where you are and where you need to work. And mentors can help, direct managers should be giving you that feedback. But I do think, it's maybe not realistic to come in, right out of college and say, well, I need to be promoted, to CEO tomorrow. Or, there's this healthy balance of understanding the experience you have, but then also using whether it's mentors and sponsors to reach for things that maybe you don't think, women have a tendency to not reach for that next thing because they want to be 100% prepared. So it's kind of that you want to prepare, but you also want to reach. And so by having these kind of people, I've heard it described as, do you have your personal board of directors who can be honest with you and kind of help you, not only telling you just kind of a yes person of you're the greatest, you should do this and that, but also, here are experiences that you need to get to the next level, or, you need to be great in the job that you have to get to the next level. I think there's, to the point that Ericka said before, you also need those influential people in the room when you're trying to climb the corporate ladder. But I think, and one thing men do very well is, and this is a generalization, but network. Women tend to sometimes put their heads down. There's a lot of research and just accept more and more and more projects without necessarily picking their head up and thinking that the networking is really part of your job and part of how you successfully negotiate and influence internally. So what I used to tell people is think about it as literally something you have to do every week. Build it into your schedule. So are you reaching out to someone? And I think it's important to have internal and external people who have mentors and sponsors. So, are you having coffee with someone? Are you, in these days, have a Zoom chat? There's very few people. I mean, people can be busy, but most of the women that I know are incredibly generous with their time and want to see other women succeed. And so really, the more people that you can know and have that social capital, I think that prepares you better. Again, things are less aggressive when you've built the relationships and people know you both personally and professionally. So.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, is having that internal and external network. And I think it goes back to, part of it goes back to some of the comments that were made earlier. I mean, you mentioned practicing and rehearsing. So these are additional people to practice, your negotiation strategies with, but then also expanding your network and having people to go to, your personal board of directors, if you will, allows you to hear different perspectives. So when you have genuine relationships, and I think Ericka, you mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily quantity, but the quality of relationships. When you have relationships that you've invested in and you spend time, quality time with individuals, you get to hear just the way that they think about things, how they process things, not even necessarily your own situation, but how they process others, which you can take into your own toolkit and utilize as well as you navigate for yourself personally. I want to, in the same vein as we're talking about relationships, one of the things that I think is so important is just the idea of really being or having emotional intelligence and knowing your audience. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on preparing for negotiations, but with regards to having that emotional intelligence, knowing who's in the room, the power player in the room, and really being self-aware, not only of yourself, but that person or others in the room as well. What types of things do you do or recommend in terms of preparing for the personalities that are going to be in the room?
I think it's the more that you frame going into a negotiation, I've heard it described, you don't want to think about it as a battle. You want to think about it as a problem-solving exercise. So understanding the dynamics and the people in the room is really helpful from a negotiation standpoint. I think things that women do really well and are really effective while negotiating are asking questions and making sure that, again, it's that clear communication and alignment that we talked about before. So I think, you know, in a negotiation, if you can ask questions, if you're really good at listening too. I mean, talking in negotiation is important, but the listening is just as crucial, because there's things that you might pick up, whether it's body language, whether it's, you know, if there's a team in the room, who is leading, who has the decision-making authority, who can you propose solutions, can you brainstorm new alternatives? I think all of that, there's verbal and nonverbal cues as part of a negotiation. So part of that is the research that you do beforehand, but part of it is in the negotiation, being very present. And I do think even in negotiations, you can see people, and it's easier on Zoom. People tend to they can tend to multitask even in the middle of a negotiation, or they can just not listen and talk over. And so the more, and it's weird in this Zoom Teams world, right? Again, it can be, it's one of the things that can be more difficult on these, because it's hard, especially in a big group, for people to chime in. And it's like calls where people can just tend to talk over each other. So again, the more that you can frame it as not adversarial, but as this problem-solving exercise that, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, a little later, the win-win for both sides, I think, and you can find that out by the power of your relationship. So whether you know people from the outside that know who you're talking to beforehand, whether, you know, whether it's internal people that, you know, you network internally and figure all of this out. I think all of that is important.
Absolutely. So Ericka, how would you respond to that question and to Stacy's comments?
Well, Stacy has shared some great information, and I love what she said about this being a problem-solving exercise. One of the things that I thought about as I was preparing for this conversation is, how are we going to see ourselves as a solution and then show up to have that conversation? So when you're talking about who is in the physical room with you, or who may be in the virtual room with you, how are you showing up powerfully? And that includes not just, you know, the body language that we talked about, you know, making the eye contact, but more importantly, what are you saying? And are you speaking the language of the person that you are speaking to? In those moments when you may not know all of the people who are in the room, it's being okay with taking a moment to pause. You don't have to always fill the space with your voice, right? I know silence makes a lot of people uncomfortable, especially when you're talking about negotiation. But if you're talking about someone like myself, who's an introvert and a processor, I'm not consistently speaking, and some of the people in the room may be the same way. So just being keenly aware, making sure that your language is confident and that it's credible, and showing up powerfully and making sure that you are present, and not just being self-aware, but aware of what's happening in the room.
I love that. You both really talked about being present and very mindful in the space, and then showing up powerfully. What are you saying? And really being thoughtful about what you're saying. And then also there's power in the pause. So you talked about being comfortable with the pause and that being okay. And, you know, having a pause oftentimes is helpful, because it allows you to just really regroup and think about what's happening real time. So that is just, I want to kind of take us in another direction. Before we do, because I do want us to get into the win-win, just quickly for both of you, do you have your own personal or a personal story in getting prepared, or one specific example of when you had to get prepared for negotiation and what went well or what maybe didn't go so well in preparation?
Oh yeah. I actually did not negotiate for a very long time in my career because I honestly didn't know it was an option. It was after you get, to the interview and you receive the offer and you say yes, then you're hired. But actually asking for more and advocating for yourself, that just was unfamiliar to me. So when I heard about salary negotiation, which was about 20 years ago at this point, I made a commitment to myself that I was willing to have the conversation to make sure that I was paid equitably. And my first successful negotiation was actually in 2003 around salary. And I decided that I would leverage the 3 C's for myself. It would be clarity, it would be commitment, and it would be confidence. So it was clarity around knowing what I wanted, but again, also knowing how much they were willing to pay. And because it wasn't listed, I had to go and do some external research. The commitment was around honoring my preferences and saying, this is how much I'm worth, this is how much I want. And then, of course, the confidence to just go forward and take action and have those conversations, even though they may be unfamiliar and uncomfortable.
Wow, that's so powerful. We do have a question in the chat, but before we get to the question from Stacy Holt Ely, I did want to allow Stacy to respond quickly as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. Obviously, I negotiate every day. I do think one thing that is really worth mentioning here is that there's all this research on backlash against women who behave assertively. And it's really interesting. And it's an unconscious bias. It's this female negotiators face this double-edged sword, right? If you don't negotiate assertively, you might not attain the outcome that your male counterpart achieves. But if you do negotiate aggressively, you may face a backlash which can undermine your efforts. So I would say, we're talking about relationships and knowing the market. It's critically important to know what is worth negotiating hard over and what is worth not, right? Like there's stories of, you don't want to be so aggressive before you even have a role that someone labels you as difficult. But you do need to understand, to Ericka's 3 C's, what is it that's really important to you in the negotiation? And kind of, we'll talk about this later too, what's your walk away? And so, some things that really help is that, if you have strong outside options when you're negotiating, the funny thing is the discussion can even end in an impasse. I've seen research that it nearly triples whether you're negotiating with a man or a woman. And so I would just say, be prepared. We talked about the importance of preparedness. If you can negotiate in a way that doesn't make it seem all about you, but you frame it as what you can do for the other person that you're negotiating with. So women are better at negotiating for others sometimes than they are for themselves. So think about it, if you're negotiating, if it's a, new position or raise, if you can frame it in not just what that's going to do to you, for you, but what benefit that will, what the benefit will be for the company, I do think that helps. And so I know I saw Stacy question just asking, unable to secure a salary range or negotiating a promotion raise. Again, you've got to be really careful because there are a lot of studies. You don't want to leave it on the table because your onboarding negotiation, that's the most effective pay, where you're going to have the most effective time to negotiate your pay is when you have a new offer, right? But you don't want to, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, because it's this unconscious bias that until people are aware of it, it's a fine line. So I do think if you have the research, if you have the evidence of what it's going to do to benefit the company, and then, you know, knowing what's worth fighting hard for and what's not, and knowing what's a marathon and what's a sprint, because I get told no a lot, and I can be told that I'm a bulldog about things, and, you know, why do I keep asking for it? And you've got to know when to stop beating down, but then maybe you change your strategy. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying it, but I do think you have to be careful when you're negotiating salary, how you're perceived while you're doing it. And research and preparation is the best, I think, tools for that.
Thank you. I completely agree with that, that it's really research is key, and what is the value proposition? What value are you bringing, and why is this a benefit to the other party? So that you know, you're not seen as the bulldog, but you're speaking with fairness and clarity, and your argument is as strong as it can be, so that you know when to walk away, as Stacy mentioned. So I do want us to kind of move on, because we've talked about the win-win somewhat. So let's talk about during negotiation. So once you've gotten yourself into the room, or the Zoom room, if you will. So as professionals, what advice would you have for someone once they're in the room? How do you maintain confidence and composure? So you've done all the preparation. How do you remember while you're in the moment? How do you remember your value proposition and sphere of influence while it's happening? And Stacy, I'll start with you.
I think it's always easy. It helps me to have an outline of what I'm going to say. I don't need it to be nitty gritty, kind of point by point, but to, you know, there's different ways that you can negotiate. You can negotiate issue by issue and say, okay, here's the list of 20 issues, and we're going to go point by point down. That can be very adversarial. You know, sometimes you do it that way, but you could also chunk. And that is where you kind of take a chunk of issues that maybe here are the most important, here are the least important, or you can take the easiest issues first and start with those, so you gain consensus with the other side, and then kind of leave some of the other difficult issues kind of for the end. I think, again, your body language in the negotiation, filling up the room. I think it can be even as subtle as where you sit in a room. And I mean, I was told it's natural for women to want to cross their legs. I mean, I find myself even sitting here now, I kind of cross my legs, and then I think, oh, I need to make sure, even when I'm on the screen, to uncross my legs, make sure that I'm filling up the space. You know, I would say making sure that you're clear, you're almost repetitive. So making sure that there's clarity on the points that you're going back and forth with. Going back to the relationship piece, I should have said this at the beginning, but I do think that even before, once you're in the room, even before you jump into all of the issues, I think it's really important to just go around the room, make introductions, talk about kind of, it helps de-escalate kind of the crackle in the room. I think if you can just have some small chit chat about whether it's the weather, whether it's your family, whether it's, you know, and that's whether it's with internal people at your company or external. I think that is really a crucial piece, that if people just go right into kind of the issues back and forth, I think that's a miss. And then understanding that not everything has to be resolved in one conversation. Sometimes it's more effective. People sometimes give more than they need to in a negotiation by thinking that they have to resolve everything in the one meeting. Again, frame of reference, is it something that you absolutely has to be decided in the one meeting, or can you take it in a series of meetings? And sometimes it's more effective to even say, well, both sides are going to have to go, do more research or talk to more people or think about things. So I think that's important as well. And then obviously the win-win. So, if you're negotiating some kind of deal that both people feel like at the end, that's why I became a transactional lawyer more so than a litigator, because at the end of a deal, you want everyone to think, okay, maybe it's a win-win and lose-lose, right? I feel like I got something. I wish I had gotten a little more, but I'm happy where I got. Then you have the litigation where everyone's super upset that they're involved anyways because they're right on either side. And at that point, it has escalated to a point where you're actually in court. So I just think, the more that you can get to the meat of the matter and get to somewhere, and don't even think about it. I mean, I think win-win is sometimes even the wrong word. It's, do both sides feel like they can be successful coming out of the negotiation?
And then, I love that because, if that happens, if both sides feel like their needs are met, the relationship stays intact and it's really a positive experience. So Ericka, just to add on to what Stacy has already said, how would you say that you maintain, or how would you recommend to others that you maintain confidence and composure, and also while you're in the room, remember your value proposition and sphere of influence?
Yes, I love this question because even though we're talking about what to do during the actual conversation, for me, it goes back to how you prepare. And so we talked a little bit moments ago about how healthy preparation increases your confidence, but preparation also helps you to focus. And so to Stacy's point about having that outline before you go in, when you go in focused, you are fully aware of what your value proposition is, but you are also mindful of the fact, and this is what's helped me, this is a conversation. And so if I frame this as this is a conversation, it is a two-way street where I'm able to take the emotion out of it and figure out a way to get both of our needs met through active listening and engagement. And being okay with being uncomfortable enough to say, if we hit an obstacle or something that I haven't anticipated, proactively thinking in my preparation about how I will approach that. So the way I remain calm, it all goes back to my preparation. Knowing what my value proposition is, anticipating what could be a potential roadblock or an obstacle, and framing this as what it is for me, which is a conversation and a way to dialogue and figure out how we can both have our needs met the best way possible. And I love the fact that Stacy said that this could potentially be more than one conversation. So giving room, time, and space for the appropriate conversation to get us to the successful outcome.
And Ericka just reminded me too that I really think it's crucial that honesty and integrity in everything you do. That's kind of, you hope that that's the first thing, but you never know your interactions with people. All you really have, the number one thing that you can control is your honesty and your integrity. And so you don't know if this person will come around later, even if it's on the opposing side of a negotiation, they might recommend you for work to someone else later on. And so how you comport yourself in those situations, I think is critically important, and just to remember to have your center there no matter, and behave, even if others are, I've been in negotiations where the other side has, flown off the handle and been screaming and yelling and even throwing things. I've been there. And I think, the more you can de-escalate those kinds of tension and remain true to yourself, I think that is important. to mention as well.
I think that's great. When you just said that, Stacy, you know, it made me go back to the idea of relationship building. So when you have your integrity in place, right, when you're being honest and you are and coming to a discussion in that manner, even if what you're needing is not in the best interest of the other party, they still remember how you approached that conversation. And they may also remember not only how you approached it, but what your needs were at that time. So if another opportunity comes about with them or any other aspect or place in the organization or elsewhere, they will remember you and that encounter and hopefully recommend you and advocate for you on your behalf later outside the room even. So I want to start with Ericka on this next question. And I want to talk a little bit about self-advocacy. How do you determine where to compromise, what's non-negotiable, right? And you know, where do you ask for more? Where do you leave more to concede? We've talked about the win-win and both sides feeling like they've won something, but how do you determine what is that walk-away point for you?
Thank you so much. Self-advocacy, like we could talk about this forever. I mean, KPMG actually did a women's leadership survey a few years ago, and they asked women the lessons they learned growing up. And a lot of the women who responded, they were not taught to lead. They were taught to be helpful. They were taught to be a team player, but not necessarily share their point of view. So just over the years and seeing, you know, how we got here, a lot of this has stemmed from childhood and how we're socialized. And so I, myself personally have decided a long time ago not to sit on my ask. And my mom says I should spell that to make sure that people know I'm saying ASK. So make sure you are not sitting on your ask. And I can remember Black Enterprise, the way I ended up partnering with them, they actually did not ask for me. I asked them. So self-advocating for me at that point was, I'm interested in being a coach during one of your events. I contacted their office in New York. Someone called me back shortly thereafter. I coached 1 year. The following year, I had a conversation with them about wanting to facilitate an actual session because I knew that aside from the one-on-one coaching, I could add more value and create a win-win, right? By facilitating a workshop. So just by me advocating for myself that first year, I was able to then come back to the table, have a different conversation, still have that win-win that we've been talking about, and also be interviewed for a podcast and contribute to an article. So being able to not sit on your ask and create a win-win for your employer, for your partnering organization, you have to have, again, going back to clarity, right? On the front end, what is it that I want? What is it that's a nice to have? And what is it that's unacceptable for me? Because sometimes people will want you to do all of these things, but they're not realistic from a capacity standpoint. And if you're talking about compensation, it just won't work for you. So just, again, having that clarity to say, what is it that I want? What is it that's nice to have? And what is it that's a non-negotiable for me? But ultimately being able to have a conversation where your value proposition shows up, right? And you're saying, this is who I am, this is how I can help you, or how I can solve your problem, improve your condition, meaning this is how it will benefit you, and being able to bridge that gap.
Ericka, I love that. I think I actually wrote this down because I saw something in Harvard Business Review that said the way from a win-win perspective, I thought it was such a good example. So instead of saying, getting an MBA is important for my development as a manager, you frame it as that win-win. So with the additional financial and managerial skills I'll gain in an MBA program, I'll be able to assist in or lead more complex tasks or projects, enabling you to focus on more strategic and high-level priorities. So I think just even the simple framing, exactly what you were saying, Ericka, can be critically important. I think it is important to know what matters to you. So some people, especially now, you know, you're going to have some people that say, you know, remote work is a non-negotiable for me because of COVID and I need to be with my family. Others are going to have non-negotiables around salary, or, you know, to Ericka's point, if someone says, well, I'd love for you to take on X, Y, and Z, that's important for my development. Here's the resources that I may need in order to be successful. You know, again, a reframing if you're asking for more resources to do the project. So, and again, I think setting your expectations that you're not always going to hear yes. And sometimes you're going to have an upward battle, and not to be, if it's, again, as Ericka said, if it's a nice to have, but not a have to have, that's okay, right? And you can keep trying. If it's your non-negotiable, then I think that's obviously a different thing, and that's different for every single person who's sitting in this room, what that non-negotiable is, because we're all very different and have different, you know, whether it's families, jobs, flexibility, there's all sorts of things that could be our non-negotiables.
That's right. So I want to ask another question of you. I would love to hear, you know, now that we've talked about preparing, which is really helping a lot in this conversation, because once you're in the room, you're falling back on a lot of the things that you use to prepare. So, you know, in terms of knowing what is negotiable for you, you really determine that before you get there. You're making your argument before you get into the room as well. I would love to hear some examples from you about what not to do, or where something did not go well for you personally. And if you don't have an experience, what would you recommend to avoid? And then Ericka, I'll start with you on that question.
I would say what I would recommend avoiding is making sure that you are not using language that will cause someone to question your confidence, your competence, and your credibility. And so sometimes, and I created a course around this, and it's not specifically around negotiation, but it's ditching the downplay, because sometimes we downplay our accomplishments, or the language that we use isn't as assertive as it should be for women. But I've seen, especially in some of the conversations that I've had around money with women, is language like, I don't know if there's money in the budget for this. Instead of leading with that, and I actually, for this conversation, captured a few things, right? A few statements that you could use instead. My job has expanded this year, and I'd like to discuss how my raise will reflect the additional responsibilities, versus leading with, I don't know if we have money in the budget. So just when it comes to having these conversations that may be uncomfortable for you, that may be unfamiliar, make sure that you are still showing up as someone who has confidence and that you're speaking with credibility. Because when people can see that you are a little less confident, or they may see you as emotional or unstable, as they like to label us sometimes as women in the workplace, they are more than likely going to not give you what it is that you are requesting, just because of their perception of you and how you are presenting yourself.
That's really powerful. Yeah, it's how are you presenting yourself? What are you projecting while you're in the negotiation? Stacy, how would you respond to that question?
Yeah, I agree. And I think something really, I think sometimes when I've, you know, I say failed, but when there's been opportunities, is you've got to pick your moment, right? You know, if your company is not having a great year, for example, maybe it's not the year where you say, you know, I need a 3x raise in the middle of, you know, COVID shuts down all of your operations. I'm not saying I did that. I'm just saying that's an example of something, you need to understand when the timing is right too. You know, like don't, you know, some silly things, but like no one wants to hear bad news on a Friday afternoon, or, you know, pick even the time of day matters when you're making asks or influencing. And I do think, you know, going back even to this mentorship and sponsor, and I saw a question in here from Shalimar about navigating the intersectionality of professionalism and presence. And so that's passion, and having that not be construed as a lack of control. I do think part of that is the more people you can, passion is good and authenticity is great, but knowing when to channel and use that, and having other people in your corner where, again, no one mistakes the passion, that your passion for either being selfish. You know, the more kind of consensus that you can build and influence that you can make, and then pick your moment. I'm not saying wait on the sidelines forever, but there is something to understand, and that's that emotional intelligence. When is the right time to ask for stuff? And have you been getting positive feedback where you think it's, you know, I don't think it's the right time if you're getting consistently negative feedback to say you need to raise in a promotion. So I think making sure that you're picking those moments is very important.
So I completely agree with that. I think the timing and that, you know, really thinking about, and that again goes back to the preparation, is now the right time to ask for this. I think everything goes back to the preparation, right? How do I respond in this moment? It goes back to the preparation. And I love that, you know, someone mentioned mindset matters. When you're walking into the room, it matters where you are in your headspace, really, when you're having these conversations and discussions. So we've done a lot of talking about before, and now we've talked a lot about the during, and even, you know, most recently, what to avoid, what things should we consider. And I love that, you know, we're talking about body language, posture, how you're projecting and presenting, and some of those pitfalls there. I want us to move on now to talk about the after. So let's talk about post negotiation. And we've talked a little bit about like the walk away point, right? Like when it's time to walk away. I'd like for us to go into resilience. Can you share examples, and I'll start with you, Stacy, on how, or the importance of resilience, especially if things don't go your way?
I think it's really, I mean, resilience is critical, especially in everything that we all have navigated over the past 18 months. I think a lot of people have struggled, and resiliency and agility have been two key things. So I do think as much as you can be flexible and learn and debrief, so there should always be a reflection point. And I know that you don't always have time to do it, but I think you get better when you look back in a negotiation and you say, okay, what went well there? What didn't go well? You know, research has shown that people are most likely to regret actions that they didn't take. So it's that omission versus typically. And so did you ask the right questions in the meeting to get the information that you needed to then take action in response to? So I think, you know, if you're in a group of people, if you are a team that we're going in to negotiate, I think having a team debrief session is always really useful. If it's just you personally who did it, I think, you know, just even sitting down with a notepad or your computer and kind of making, you know, this went well, this didn't go well, this is how I'm going to work on this go forward. I think that's a powerful tool in outcomes. And I do think never giving up and never doubting yourself. I think that's very important. You're going to hear no, you're going to get critical feedback at times, and you've got to take that and make yourself better. But I remember I was talking about when I had that career coach and I used to watch myself on video personally. I remember I would watch myself on video. I would get into the car after the meeting and I would cry the entire way home because it was so painful watching myself because I was so hard on myself and how I was presenting, and learning, and now I don't think twice about presenting, but that took years of repetition and practice and not doing maybe the best job and then continuing even when it's uncomfortable and hard to keep going. I think that's very important.
That's wonderful. So I want to hear also, Ericka, what are your thoughts on resilience and the importance of resilience? Yeah.
So when I think of resilience, I think about bouncing back, but then with the backdrop being what we've experienced, right, over the last 18 months, as well as, what can happen when you are having these negotiation conversations, dealing with the rejection, having multiple conversations, not just everything happening in that one conversation. And so after a negotiation conversation is done, sometimes you just feel exhausted. And in those moments, when you do, I recommend making sure that you have the support that you need. Oftentimes, when we think about being resilient, we think about being strong, but there's also strength in numbers. So just making sure that you have the support that you need to help you maintain that resiliency. Also, Stacy mentioned, if this was a team negotiation, what can you glean in terms of feedback? Asking, how do you feel that negotiation conversation went? How is it that I showed up, so that you have perspective outside of yourself? Sometimes we take the feedback from ourselves, but the reality is we can't see outside of ourselves. So being able to have someone share with us, what went well, maybe what didn't go so well, what can we improve upon? We can then take the step to say, okay, in terms of being resilient, moving forward, now that I have the support, now that I have a level of feedback, and to Stacy's point, I've reflected, what is it that I need to start doing? What is it that I need to stop doing? And what is it that I need to continue doing?
That's wonderful. So to take it a step further, how do you leave negotiation feeling empowered? And Ericka, I'll start with you since you were the last one.
Sure. The way that I leave these conversations feeling empowered is I leave everything on the court, right? It's doing the best I can with what I have, but also making sure that I've done my due diligence on the front end with preparation, that I'm walking away without having regret.
I love it. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. You said leave it all on the court. I mean, it is, again, it's back to that preparation.
Yes.
And you talked about not having any regrets, wishing that there had been something said.
Mhm.
And it's easier to have that list, as Stacy mentioned earlier, is really having a list to go through before you get in the room, if that's your strategy, so that you can make sure any point you wanted to make gets made. Stacy, what would you say to that? How do you leave feeling empowered?
I think everything that Ericka said, and then also it's nice if you can having a wrap up even during the negotiations. So where you get to a certain point, whether you've addressed every issue, hopefully everyone has said what they need to say, but just appreciate you for spending the time with me to go through this, or talking about kind of the successful outcomes or the business relationship, or how do you put the bow on it to wrap it up in a way where people leave feeling empowered. And you can do that whether it's with your manager or whether it's with someone kind of on an opposing side of a negotiation. So I think, again, it leads back to how you, even if things get aggressive during the negotiation, how do you leave it so everyone's feeling that win-win at the end, and you wrap it up and you're ready to take action on the things that maybe didn't go as well. Kind of what are your next steps? What are you going to focus on? To R. Howard, mindset matters. I totally agree. And so you can come out of a negotiation feeling, you know, upset, angry, whatever it is, or you can take the negotiation and feed that into taking powerful steps in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I do want to begin wrapping up. So I wanted to get a few final thoughts. So final thoughts before we open up to questions. And then also, lastly, do you have any recommended resources like videos, podcasts, books, articles that we might find helpful in the future?
I think Harvard Business Review has a ton of great stuff. I always find their articles, podcasts really good. I think there's some really good TED Talks out there on negotiation and leadership. I think Stanford has some great things. Kellie, I think you mentioned KPMG, maybe that was Ericka, one of you did. Some of those consulting firms, whether it's you know, KPMG or PwC or some of the other ones, there's some great things there. I will put a plug in for, I did Leadership Charlotte, maybe, I don't know how many years ago now, 8 years ago. And that was something, you know, any kind of leadership course, whether that's, you know, a lot of companies will have leadership courses that are internal, or there might be something like Leadership Charlotte that's external. It might be a career coach. You know, there's lots of resources, free or paid, out there. And so, you know, the internet's a powerful thing too, and lots of books out there.
Thank you, Stacy. Ericka, what about you?
I would echo what Stacy said. She pretty much covered it. And, you know, people just have different preferences. So using the internet to, you know, research what resource would work best for you. And then, of course, if you are interested in having a coaching conversation, you can visit my website at erickaspradley.com, and there is a contact tab, and you can just send me a note and we can connect that way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Are there any additional questions from the group? Feel free to put them in the chat and our wonderful panelists can speak to them. And as we're waiting, I just, you know, again, wanted to say thank you to Stacy and Ericka for all of the information that you provided today. It's very important. One of the things that I do as president of the Junior League of Charlotte, our mission really is to develop women and really for the benefit of our community. And so negotiations are not just important for us professionally, but even we negotiate when we're doing things on behalf of our community and the community that we serve. So thank you so much for all of this information. Caroline has a question. I heard a study that women apply to jobs that they are 100% qualified for, but men tend to apply for jobs they are 70% qualified for. Do you recommend women reaching for a higher goal through pursuing opportunities that are a little above their experience? And if so, are there tips for this?
Yes, absolutely. I've seen that study as well, and I would 100% recommend, even if you're 75 or 70% qualified for the job, trying, because again, it's that fear of failure. So what is the worst thing that's going to happen? You're not going to get the role, but you're going to learn something going through the process. So, you know, I think tips for doing that is talk to people who have the job that you want. So, you know, if there's other people at other companies in those roles, or people you could talk to about, or people at the company or whatever it is, but you should definitely, you're never going to regret going for it. I mean, the worst is that you spent time on it and that you might be rejected, but you'll learn something through the process.
Yeah, I would also add to that, and this is something that I read many years ago, and it has stuck with me. It said, men take charge and women take care. And so a lot of times, when men are more assertive as it relates to, pursuing something that's considered a stretch opportunity or something beyond the scope of what it is they're doing, we'll talk ourselves out of our success. You want to make sure that you are not being your first no. And what that looks like from an I'm going to apply for this role standpoint, it's even if you haven't had the title in some instances, it doesn't mean that you can't do the job. So it's reframing your resume to make sure that you are meeting, those requirements that you may have second guessed yourself around, and positioning yourself as someone who can perform in this role once hired. So just taking a different perspective in terms of looking at your skill set, your qualifications, your experience. I had a recent conversation with a young lady during a coaching session, and she said, I have been contacted for an interview, but I'm fearful because I've never had a leadership role. And I said, you've never had a leadership role, or you've never had the title of leadership? Because she's been leading the entire time and is already doing part of the role. But again, it was the way she was seeing herself. So just make sure that you are looking at your expertise from a skill and a results perspective, not necessarily a title perspective, depending on the level of your career and your industry, and not talking yourself out of your yes.
Ericka, and that reminds me too, if you're at a company, for example, where you don't have a leadership job in your role, but let's say there's a business resource group that you could, or board experience, or something in other areas where you can join and show leadership through, board, like being on a committee, then leading a committee, then getting on a board, or, all of those things. It doesn't have to be your direct job where you hone your qualifications. It can be other things too that are external that kind of help complete your pie.
That's perfect, Stacy. Thank you so much for that. And I can speak to that even personally for myself, as through the Junior League of Charlotte, I've had so many different leadership experiences along the way that they have transcended and even allowed me to have different experiences professionally that I wouldn't have had I not had those leadership experiences through the Junior League. And so this is that is exactly a good point that I think that many people should really adhere to. I do want to go ahead now. Thank you guys again, Stacy and Ericka, for all of your insights and wisdom that you've shared with us today. I would like to turn things over to Charisse. Thank you again, Charisse, and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much for that rich conversation. Stacy, Ericka, Kellie, it was just so empowering to hear all of the words of wisdom around how you prepare, how you manage the process of negotiation when you're in it, and how you want to walk away from it. So thank you for covering those key points that really, I think, strengthen this conversation. We had a lot of activity in the chat. Really appreciate all of the words that you shared, and really appreciate the audience being so engaged and providing such insight and learnings that they have shared. We always learn a great deal from our audience members as well. I think that as we wrap up, I do want to just remind everybody, this is our last Power of Women virtual session for the year, but we are gearing up to make sure that 2022 is impactful and empowering for you all as well. I believe that Audrey, my colleague, is going to place up a final poll question. And thank you for those that are sharing again in the chat. But a satisfaction survey for how you think today went. That is very helpful in how we move forward in providing these opportunities to you. So looks like we've got some high markings. So ladies, again, thank you for what you provided to get us there. I want to again thank everybody for participating on this virtual call with us. We look forward to sharing more information with you around how we are going to shape the Power of Women experience in 2022. We're looking for that to be in person. I thank you again, and I'm going to really wish that you all have a great day, great week, and put those tips to use that our panel shared today. Have a great day, everyone.